morning. My name is Rachel Carruthers, and I'm the events manager here at the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to Growth Basics for Business, a monthly breakfast seminar series which provides a forum to gain useful, do-it-yourself workplace solutions and insightful, actionable tips. Today is the final event in the 2023-24 season of Growth Basics for Business. I want to thank Eaton Peabody partners for their continued support of this virtual event series throughout the season. Today's topic, Staying in Business, is presented by Whit Ford, a certified mentor at SCORE, Southern Maine. As a business owner, you've gone through the rigors of securing space, advertising and marketing, opening your business, and growing a clientele. Now it's time to make the transition from a new business to a long-lasting institution. Whit will go over the keys to keeping a business going for the long haul. He'll teach us how to better understand and maintain our market and value, how to examine business trends and plan ahead, and he'll also explore the many avenues we can take to stabilize the day-to-day rigors of our businesses to keep us looking and moving forward. Like all the Chamber's virtual signature events, today's presentation is free and is being recorded. It will be made available for free replay on the Chamber's website and YouTube page. To keep up to date on all the Chamber's news and events, visit our website, portlandregion.com. Check out our events page and sign up for our weekly email newsletter while you're there. Before we begin today's program, I just want to remind everyone that we are using a platform named StreamYard this morning. This platform provides improved production and interactive elements that truly enhance virtual events. On that note, I'd like to point out that when you have questions for our presenter today, you can type them in the YouTube chat. They'll be relayed to Whit throughout the presentation. And we'll also save some time at the end for Q&A. At this point, I'd like to acknowledge our presenting sponsor for Growth Basics for Business, Eaton Peabody. For over 6 years, Eaton Peabody has been the presenting sponsor of this series, and they've yet again continued their support this season. Eaton Peabody is a full-service Maine-based law firm with nearly 50 attorneys, serving Maine clients from offices in Augusta, Bangor, Ellsworth, and Portland. They assist companies of all sizes in a variety of industries. So whether you're an established financial institution or a small business taking just the first steps, they can help you with all your legal needs. To learn more about the services that they provide and the industries that they serve, please visit their website, eatonpeabody.com. Also be sure to follow them on Facebook or LinkedIn to stay up to date on legal updates and future presentations. Now, I would like to give a little bit more information about our presenter today before we get started. Whit Ford is a certified mentor at SCORE, a nonprofit organization and resource partner of the U.S. Small Business Administration that has helped more than 17 million entrepreneurs grow or successfully exit business opportunities since its inception in 1964. SCORE's 10,000 volunteers provide free expert mentoring with resources and education in all 50 U.S. states and territories. Whit owned a small business in Maine for 25 years and has experience in the industrial marketing, strategic planning, software development, nonprofit, and education industries. Specifically, he can help you establish your LLC in Maine, develop your value proposition, forecast your financials, develop a business plan, refine your pitch, and plan your business's growth. We're very grateful to have his knowledge and expertise in this season of Growth Basics for Business. And with that, I'm going to hand the mic off to the expert in the room. Whit, take it away.
Thank you, Rachel. Welcome to Staying in Business. I invite you to please use the YouTube comments to give me a quick sense of what kind of business you're in. And I also invite you to ask questions as they arise. That's often the best time to try to answer them. So I'm happy to address questions as they come up, in part because many of the topics I talk about this morning are going to be reminders for you, more so than in-depth explanations. So if you want a little more depth on a particular question or topic, I'm happy to do that at the time, but I want to get through the presentation in the allotted time too. So it'll be a balancing act. So what should you do to stay in business? Whether you are successful and growing wildly at the moment, or nice and stable, thank you, or perhaps struggling to achieve some of your goals. Well, the first thing that I would recommend is to keep your goals firmly in mind. Many people think about the what of their doing and also spend a lot of time thinking about the how of what they're doing. But I encourage you to always keep the why in your thinking. Keep in mind the reason you started this business, what it is you get out of it, what it is you want out of it. And if the business is not meeting your why goals, that's cause for some deep reflection, and maybe some changes in the business. It's possible that it has gone off in a direction that no longer supports the why goals that led you to start it. So I thought I'd start with this because the why is at the core of why so many people start a business, and it's important to revisit that periodically. Secondly, a business is more than just a product or service that you offer. It involves the processes you develop, the policies, the equipment you need, the capital you've raised, the software you use, the vendors you interact with, your employees and staff. All of those people together, all those processes, all those elements together are what create your business. It is not just your product or service. And so it's important to review all of these elements, not just think about one or two of them as you think about your business as a whole and plot your way forward to achieve your goals for next year. As the owner of your business, you by now, if you're in business, presumably are already thoroughly comfortable with the fact that you have a number of roles that in many cases you cannot delegate completely. You will always need to be able to market and sell your offerings. You may have salespeople working for you. They may do a lot of the selling, but when the big contract comes along, guess who they're going to call in to close the deal? It's going to be you. So expect to always be marketing and selling to a greater or lesser degree over the course of your business's history, and keep those skills sharp. Keep your hand in the marketing and sales part of your business, even if you don't see that as being your primary responsibility. Second, as the owner, it's up to you to build and manage your team, not just staff, but as I'll talk about later, your whole group of people that you interact with in order to run your business. It's up to you to develop your processes. Many processes may not have been thought about consciously initially, but as you searched for consistency over time, you probably started to standardize a number of processes that are important to your business. So as you reinvestigate those processes, maybe if you have employees, you will delegate that process of refining your processes to your staff, and that's fine. But as the owner, as the manager, it's up to you to trigger that periodic re-examination of your processes, or the identification of areas which need processes that don't have them currently. And to say, we're not consistent enough in the way we do this. Let's come up with a standard way that we choose to do this and tweak it until we like it. It's also up to you to monitor your financials. Your financials are something that some business owners are very comfortable with, some not so much. Both are fine, but you need to use them. They are an incredibly useful tool. And if you're one of those people that prefers not to look at your financials, I would suggest you work to overcome that, at least to some small degree, so that you are comfortable relying upon them regularly for critical information. And lastly, every business needs money from time to time, And as the owner, it's up to you to raise needed funds. And in many cases, that can mean that you are responsible for positioning the business well to be able to raise such funds. So it's often very useful to remain aware of what lenders or investors or partners seek in a business and to try to position your business to meet those criteria so that when you do wish to raise funds, it's a little bit easier to do so. So those are the key roles that I perceive as a business owner, things that you need to keep thinking about over time. So this morning, I'd like to talk about 5 core topics to staying in business. The first is, has your market evolved? I invite you to annually re-examine who buys from you. Now, you may be used to developing a customer persona for your typical customer, such as, are they largely within a certain age range or of a certain gender? Do they tend to have a certain income range or come from a certain geographic area, etc.? Those things can and do shift over time. You may find that the folks who were a majority of your customers last year aren't quite such a large majority this year. And there's some new demographic that is starting to grow in importance in your customer base. It's important to realize that and to circle back and add their profile to your list of customer profiles, typical customer profiles, that informs your marketing efforts. So think carefully about how, if at all, your customer base may have started to shift slightly over the past year. And if so, begin to reflect that shift in the materials that you use to drive your marketing efforts. Secondly, if you don't have a value proposition, I highly recommend them. And I have some links on the next slide that will help you become more familiar with value propositions if this is not something that you're familiar with already. But your value proposition is usually a brief statement, a sentence, maybe 2, that describes what it is you're offering, who you're offering it to, why they should value it, and how you're better than your competition in their eyes. And it's important that you have thought about all of that, because in doing so, you put yourself in your customer's shoes and you try to discover your customer's language that they use to describe what it is that they find appealing about your product or your service. And once you understand the language that makes sense to them, that is the language you probably want to be using in your marketing. That can often be language that is completely different than what I might have used as the founder of the company in describing the 4,327 neat things about my product. My core customers probably care most about 2 or 3 of those. And it's important that I keep their perspective in mind, even though I am incredibly enthusiastic about what I'm doing. So your market, the market you serve, may evolve. And if the market evolves, you need to reevaluate your value proposition statement. And once a year is probably a pretty good frequency with which to do that. And I might point out that if you serve multiple market segments, you may have a separate value proposition for each one of them. The different demographics I talked about briefly on the last slide may each have their own value proposition statement, which may be somewhat similar to the previous one, but slightly different. That's okay. Think about whether it's more appropriate to have one for all or slightly different ones for each key market segment. Afterwards, you'll receive a copy of the slide deck. These underlined bullet points are all hyperlinks that you can use to get to some interesting websites that will help you out with value proposition statements. This is a common thing that we work on with a number of our clients, and there's no one way of doing it, but we can all learn more about how to write a good value proposition statement. So I invite you to follow these links and learn a bit more about how to better take your customer's perspective and come up with marketing terminology and approaches that are appealing to your target demographics. So after you've thought about whether your market has evolved over the past year, I invite you to next think about the team that you work with. And your team consists not only of your staff, but also perhaps your attorney, your accountant, your banker, your insurance agent, your business peers, colleagues you talk with occasionally, trade organizations you're a member of, such as the Chamber of Commerce, and or business mentors you may work with, such as SCORE mentors. All those people and more are people that you should think of as being part of your team. Just because they may not be direct employees does not make them any less a part of your team. So your goal in working with these people is to keep them in the loop once you've got them and treat them like team members on an ongoing basis. Why? Well, if they're not aware of what's going on with your business, they can't be reminded as well about things that maybe they should bring to your attention. So what I suggest is that you send them an email a couple of times a year, or a letter if you wish to do that even if it's only something you're just saying, hey, I just want you to know this. I'm not asking for a response. I don't want to incur any billable hours, but I just want you to know this has been happening in my business. And your goal in saying something like that is to have your business come to their mind when they come across something new to them, perhaps, that might apply to your business. You want them to say, oh, I should send that to Joe because that will be relevant for him right now. So laws get implemented every year or repealed. Rules change, policies change, best practices can change. Your team members are the people that are often in the best position to bring those changes to your attention and help you understand better why they're relevant to your business. So don't just reach out to your accountant at tax time, keep them in the loop at other times during the year. And the same applies to your insurance agent, your attorney, etc. Thirdly, you want to manage your risk going forward. And risk can come from a number of areas: legal, financial, and regulatory. Every business has some legal risks. If you have incorporated as an LLC or a C Corp or so on, you probably did so in part to reduce the legal risk that might be posed to your personal assets by the activities of your company. So that is one way in which you may have already chosen to help control the legal risks that you face by being in business. But there are a number of tactics that you can use to reduce legal risks. And if you haven't taken them, if they're appropriate for your business, you may wish to consult with your attorney to see whether maybe you should take them. Examples are having contracts that you actually sign with customers instead of just doing business on a handshake, having formal policies that you document and you expect your employees to follow and you follow yourself. Having specific procedures for staff to follow. This is how we set a table. This is how we cash somebody out at the register. And once again, you expect everybody to follow that procedure. And if the procedure doesn't always work, then it needs to be changed. You can also sometimes reduce your legal risk by spending a little more time training your staff to ensure that they're aware of all your policies and procedures and have some practice in following them. And then lastly, maybe you need to periodically just stand there and watch what's happening to make sure that everybody really is following all those policies and procedures. Now, doing all that can probably reduce your legal risks, but it may not reduce the risk to zero. And so another possibility is you may be able to insure against some of them. And that's something to talk about with your insurance agent. There are many kinds of insurance, and many businesses have some insurance, but may not have all the insurance that they might actually be interested in at the moment. On the other hand, sometimes you might have more insurance than you might feel you need at the moment. For a new business, many things that you can insure against may be critical, because if you had a loss greater than a certain amount, that could put your business at risk. And you don't want that. And so the premium cost of the insurance is worth it because it reduces the risk that your company might be put out of business by such a loss. But as the company grows and becomes more financially successful, you may find that that policy that made great sense in year one or year two is no longer appropriate for your business. Maybe you could now afford a much higher deductible and therefore save yourself some money on the premiums. Or maybe you need a new kind of insurance that you've never needed before. So, excuse me, it's useful to go through your business's needs with your insurance agent and see what they would recommend. Just because they recommend it doesn't mean you have to buy it, but it's always a good idea to listen to what other people recommend you consider and then decide whether it appeals to you or not. So ask yourself, how much of a loss would put your business at risk? And has that number changed over the past year? If you, for example, are starting to generate cash flow for the first time, you can probably tolerate a greater deductible than you could in the past, and that would reduce your premiums. Perhaps there's some risks that you no longer feel that you need to insure against, and you could just assume the entire risk yourself and cancel that policy. Or maybe there are new risks that have only arisen as a result of your growing larger in size or taking on employees and things like that. So maybe you need to increase the limits on a policy because you are now doing so much more business and have larger clients, and therefore the size of the potential financial risk has grown. All of those are reasons to sit down with your insurance agent annually to review that your insurance coverage is appropriate for your business as it exists today. Furthermore, there are a number of requirements that we're all subject to that can change. Those imposed by your town or city, you might have local ordinances that changed, or those at the federal or state level that might have changed. And these are all things that can be a challenge to stay on top of for anybody and for everybody for that matter. So that's where I see your team that you've been relying upon as being the most helpful in identifying things that have changed that you should pay attention to. So turn to your attorney, your accountant, but also perhaps your payroll services provider or your HR consultant or the IRS or state revenue websites or your local code enforcement officer or fire chief or your professional associations to help identify what has changed that you need to focus on and make sure you stay ahead of. If you are part of a partnership, meaning you are a multi-member LLC or a partnership, some sort of an S corp with more than one member, you should review your partnership or operating agreement regularly. Once a year is good, once every couple of years at the latest, probably, because you may find that many of the terms in your partnership agreement have become either dated or no longer relevant after the changes in your business since it was founded. And things like how your business would be valued if a new partner wants to buy in or if an existing partner wants to cash out could have a major impact on your business. So I encourage you to review your partnership agreement, which if you're an LLC would be called an operating agreement, and make sure that the terms in there and the valuation scheme that it describes for how to value your business still makes sense for your business and still feel right for you and your partners. Do the voting rights specified and the income distribution scheme specified still make sense? These are questions which are often topics that people are reluctant to start a discussion about. Because they can be difficult discussions at times. But it is a lot less expensive to address these issues now than it is later. If a partner decides they want to leave and the agreement has been updated and is woefully out of date and really doesn't apply well, it can turn into a very expensive legal battle. It's a lot cheaper to fix it now and to negotiate something in the light of day with all of your partners that you feel applies well to your business now than it is to deal with a legal fight once the issue arises and somebody's trying to leave or somebody new is trying to join. And lastly, one new thing that is brand new this year, if you haven't heard about the Corporate Transparency Act, well, now you have. This affects all LLCs, whether you have just created your LLC this year or whether you've been in business for years and years and years. If you have not already registered with FinCEN, you need to register this year if you were already in business last year. If you've just established an LLC, you may have as little as 30 days after the establishment of your LLC in which to declare your company's current beneficial ownership to FinCEN. And this can get tricky because the 30-day clock may start when the Maine Secretary of State dates your certificate of formation. And you may not get the certificate until 2 or 3 weeks after that date, which means you'd have 1 week to meet the 30-day requirement for registering with FinCEN. So if you have not looked at this, look at it as soon as you can. This is important. If you're an existing corporation, you may have the rest of the year to register, but it never is too soon to learn about what the requirements are going to be. Now, the tricky part is if any element of the beneficial ownership changes, such as you renew your driver's license, you have to update your registration within 30 days. So this is something that you need to be aware of and jump on. The two links here, one to the small entity compliance guide and the other to the frequently asked questions, will let you hear straight from the horse's mouth exactly what the requirements are. You can register online or by downloading a PDF and completing it offline and then re-uploading it. Either way is fine. They tried to make the process fairly easy to get through, but do learn about it. And if you have questions, consult your accountant or your attorney. Number 4, use your financials. We get a lot of questions about financial statements. If you're not comfortable using your financials, I invite you to learn a bit more about each of them. You don't have to become an expert. The 1,000-foot view is often good enough, but you should be using your financial statements every month. Not only should you be making sure that they've been reconciled to your bank account to ensure that they reflect reality, but also you should be reviewing them to look for signs that your business may not be operating as you expected. So we have some blog posts that are pretty short, sort of 1 or 2 page overviews. So if you're not comfortable with any of these 3 statements, check out the links on this slide to learn more about your balance sheet, income statement, and statement of cash flows. They all can be very useful to help you understand why your bank balance is what it is, and what seems to be working as expected in your business and what might not. So as you look in particular at your income statement, I encourage you to look at your income statement through the lens of fixed versus variable expenses. Your fixed expenses, if you're not already aware of these terms, are the expenses that tend to not vary with your revenues. Things like your rent, or perhaps your insurance costs. Those don't tend to go up and down as you make more or less money. But variable expenses do vary with revenues. So cost of goods sold is a variable expense. Electricity might be a fixed expense for some companies, might be a variable expense for other companies. Depends on what you do and whether the volume of sales influences how much electricity you use. You don't have to analyze fixed versus variable perfectly, but just doing a quick sort of all your expenses into fixed versus variable will help you understand better how you can stay profitable. And the reason this is important to keep on top of is that fixed expenses can be deadly in tough times. And if you've managed through COVID, you've already learned this. It's the expenses that don't go down when your revenues go down that can drain your bank account. And so do keep a tight rein on your fixed expenses. Do try to keep or build a cash reserve against tough times. And I encourage you to think carefully about opportunities to quote unquote save money. If you buy 3 times the volume of something, you might get a volume discount and therefore have each unit cost you less to purchase, which is good. However, if you then have so much on hand that's going to take you months and months and months to go through it, and you need to pay to store it, that's bad. And if the total cost of purchasing it drains your bank account to where you're staying awake at night, worried if you're going to meet the next payroll, that's also bad. So saving money on variable expenses doesn't always make sense from the perspective of the business as a whole. Yes, technically it improves your profitability, but it may increase the riskiness, the financial risk that your business faces. So it's a balancing act between which expenses you're willing to have be fixed and which you prefer to be variable. Do you want to buy the new truck and have to fork out all the cash at the beginning? Or do you prefer to finance it or lease it so that maybe it costs you more, but you don't have to part with all your cash on day one? To make that decision, look at your cash reserve and decide whether you have enough cash to do that without sacrificing your ability to sleep well at night. You should also be comfortable reviewing your business's financial metrics every month. Now, most businesses are slightly different from your neighbor, and so you will probably use slightly different metrics as well, and that's fine. But how we measure the success of our business can be a critical component of what our business is, who we are as business people. So do put down on paper exactly what measures you wish to track from month to month and what your goals are for them. And then hold yourself accountable to those goals over the course of the year. The most important metrics often follow the money. So revenues and cost of goods sold are reflected in your gross margin percent. Gross margin percentage is a number that every business probably should be looking at every month. Your other expenses after cost of goods sold have an effect on your profitability and therefore your net margin percentage. So your profit divided by your revenues is your net margin percentage, and that is another important number to track. If your gross margin is good, but your net margin is bad, then that probably means that your fixed expenses may be too high. Another measure to look at net profit is your return on assets, your net profit divided by your assets. Your industry probably has an industry average, and that's a number to keep in mind. Maybe you want to earn more than that. Maybe you're okay earning less than that, but that's what your industry on average tends to earn on the assets that are being used by the business. That gives you a measure of efficiency. How efficiently are you using the money that you invested in your assets? Similarly, inventory turnover gives you a sense of how efficiently you're using the money you invested in inventory. On average, how many days does inventory stay on the shelf before it's sold? The shorter that number is, the more efficiently you are managing your inventory from a financial perspective. Now, for some businesses, that's a bad idea because you always want to have something on the shelf in case somebody walks in. You want to have it available. And so you may have a higher level of inventory than other types of businesses. The exact inventory turnover that applies to your business, once again, varies tremendously from one type of business to another. That's okay. But have an idea what your goal for your business is. A similar measure for accounts receivable is days sales outstanding. Do you have a reasonable amount of money owed to you by your customers? Not too much, not too little. Are you using that credit that you're offering them to your advantage to give you the revenues that you seek? Or are you leaving money on the table and offering terms where you didn't need to, and therefore having to finance that perhaps, which would cost you money? So I encourage you to review your metrics every month. And if this is not something that you're used to doing already, I think you'll find that once you're familiar with the metrics and how to do a quick, back of the envelope estimate of them, just looking at your financial statements, it's something that really doesn't take very long to do every month. It's not a 2-hour project. It's more like a 5 or 6 minute quick scan of your financial statements. And you'll find that you will quickly identify things that seem off. And that's the goal. And lastly, I invite you to look ahead. Are you aware of regulatory or licensing changes that are upcoming? Has the local town council been talking about something and it's coming to a vote? Or has Congress passed something that comes into effect next year? That sort of thing. Keep your thumb on the pulse of those changes and try to be ready for them. Don't forget the Corporate Transparency Act, which I mentioned earlier. Do monitor your gross margin percentage, which is largely affected by your variable expenses. If you find that it's shrinking, you may need to raise your prices because your cost of goods sold has been increasing with inflation, and your pricing may not have kept up. It's much harder to make a big jump in prices occasionally than it is to make smaller jumps more frequently. And nobody wants to raise prices. Everybody's scared about scaring off customers by a price increase. So when inflation happens to you, it's important that you explain that to your customer base and raise your prices in line with inflation to keep your gross margin. You can also, once you've been in business for a while, go back to your vendors and ask for better pricing or terms if you've not already done so. Many people get in the habit of just reordering, but after you have a good history with that vendor, you can probably say, hey, how can I get a better price? Or would you let me pay in 15 days or 30 days or 45 days instead of when placing the order? And that would get you some vendor financing. If they're willing to offer you terms and let you pay 45 days after they ship the product, they're willing to help you finance part of your business, which is cool. Obviously, that tends to happen only with well-established or major vendors, not with everyone. But if you buy a lot of stuff from them, consider asking for better terms. Monitor your net margin percentage as well. As I mentioned earlier, it's affected by both your fixed and variable costs. If you find that going down, that tells you that either fixed or variable or both are going up and not being reflected in your pricing or not being reflected in revenue growth. If revenues go down, you'll probably find net margin goes down because your fixed costs don't change. So watch your net margin and try to understand why it has changed as it has. My favorite question is why. Just seeing that it's changed is nice. What's important is to understand why it's changed, for better or for worse. Either way, you need to understand why. And lastly, if growth is anticipated, what do you need to start thinking about now in order to support that upcoming growth? Will you need money to have more inventory or hire more staff earlier than you need them so that you have time to train them so that by the time the growth happens, they already know how to do the job? There are lots of things that can be affected by growth, and the sooner you anticipate them, the easier it is they are to implement in anticipation of that growth. Think about your staffing levels, what your training requirements might be, what new equipment you might need or equipment you need to replace. Maybe you need a new location, a larger place, or a place with more foot traffic or less foot traffic, or you need place for inventory. You may want to take on new products. You may want to try to serve new markets or new market segments. All those things can be affected by your growth plans. And the sooner you can begin planning for that, the easier it will be to put things into effect and realize that growth. Now, another financial topic is coming up with a cash flow projection. And when you look ahead to the future and you thought about all the things on this slide that I just mentioned, those will all have an impact on the money that you're receiving and the money you're going to be spending. And so I do strongly encourage you to update a cash flow projection periodically. How often? Well, depends on your business. For some, updating a cash flow projection quarterly might be really useful. Others, maybe twice a year, maybe once a year. But do update your cash flow projection, particularly if you expect to see changes to your business. If you expect to grow or to shrink, that's when it's really important to update your cash flow projection to make sure that you don't run out of cash. So some things to keep in mind when working on a cash flow projection. It doesn't have to be fancy, doesn't have to be complicated, and it's certainly not going to be perfect. It's a guess. So don't expect perfection out of yourself, and don't sweat if numbers are off. Use round numbers, round to the nearest $1,000, things like that. Start by forecasting revenues before you forecast your projected expenses. The reason for that is when people project their expenses first, it's miraculous how often forecasted revenues end up being greater than expenses. Whereas if you forecast revenues first, then most people will still forecast expenses accurately, but they will have a less biased difference between their revenues and their expenses. I typically encourage people to do monthly forecasts. So forecast your cash flow every month going forward. If you feel that's not necessary or too much work, okay, fine, forecast quarterly numbers. But monthly is going to be more useful, particularly if you have a seasonal business. And what you're looking for is what's my cash balance at the end of the month. Now, most people look to see if your cash balance goes negative, which is bad because that means you're bankrupt. I encourage you to think about what bank balance lets you sleep well at night. And that's the number you want to watch for. If your projected bank balance ever falls below that sleep well at night number, that's something you want to start planning for and figure out ways to get around. It may be as simple as drawing a line of credit from your bank. So if you know in advance that an issue is coming up, you have a lot more options that you can address a lot less expensively than if it surprises you. If you're looking for a template to help you develop a cash flow projection, there's a link for one here at the bottom. This is a 3-year monthly cash flow projection template. Fits pretty nicely on one page for each year. And we're happy to help you go through it if you wish the help. So those are the major things that I recommend that you keep in mind as you look to your future if you want to stay in business and ideally grow or keep your business at the level that you like. If you want help in the process, SCORE offers free mentoring and workshops. We're a nonprofit. We're a partner of the Small Business Administration, and we have 320 offices throughout the United States. And as mentioned previously, we are the largest volunteer mentoring organizations in the U.S. And if you'd like to sign up for a mentor, you can scan this QR code and sign up for a mentor. We're happy to work with you. All the information that we discuss is confidential. So our goal is to help you make decisions that you are comfortable with. We don't make the decisions for you. We're mentors. So I don't see any questions. So now's a great time to ask them. If you have any questions, I'm happy to address them.
Actually, Whit, it looks like we do have one question. Thank you so much for your presentation, by the way. So informative. I believe we have one from R. Legier Design.
As a previous business owner of 25 years, what was something you learned in year one that you carried with you throughout your career? This is something that I convey to my SCORE clients all the time, which is year one or year zero of starting a business is incredibly intimidating. There is this major fire hose of information coming at you from all sides, and it can paralyze you because which is most important? What do I need to do now, and what can wait? So the thing that was amazing to me is at the end of year one, all that stuff was second nature by that point. And oh yeah, no big deal. I get it now. Um, but at the time, oh man, was it overwhelming. So um, don't let yourself get overwhelmed. And do reach out to friends, to colleagues, others who are in business, score mentors, whatever. Reach out to other people to say, whoa, there's all this stuff coming at me. Which of it should I pay attention to now? And what can I wait on? And that will help make your life a lot more sane and make it feel a lot more manageable. So I would say that is probably the greatest lesson that I learned in year one, that initially it's overwhelming. I will get it in time, but don't expect myself to be master of it all in month one. It ain't going to happen.
That's a good point. I could also imagine that you made some mistakes in year one that you, excuse me, also carried with you for the next 24 years.
Well, there are things like if you're running a business out of your homeowner's insurance does not cover somebody who slips and falls in your home if they're there for business purposes. So you need to have commercial insurance for your commercial activities carried on at private property. That was another lesson that I learned, I think, in year 3 or 4. Fortunately, it wasn't a problem. It's just I had never realized that was needed.
I was going to say my follow-up, excuse me, my follow-up question for that was, what was there a situation that brought that to your attention? But I'm happy to hear that you were not faced with that situation.
Well, I was doing some math tutoring, and I was going to do a class for the summer, and I needed a classroom. So I went to the local school district and I said, hey, could I use a classroom to teach kids math once a week over the summer? And the school department said, sure, you just need a $2 million liability policy. And I said, okay. So I went to my insurance agent. I said, this is what I'm doing. And the insurance agent says, where are you doing that now? And I said, oh, at home. And the agent said, you do realize that you're not covered for that activity in your home. I was like, oh.
Okay, so rule of thumb, ask questions.
Yeah, totally. We can't all be experts in everything. And so we become experts, or at least better informed over time. But your insurance agent, for example, is always going to be a better expert. Even though I may be reasonably well informed for my business, my insurance agent always knows more about what is covered and what is not than I am likely to remember. On the legal front, your attorney, even though every time you talk to them, you feel the meter goes ka-ching, well, you can reduce the cost without reducing the value of the advice you get by thinking carefully first, doing some research, perhaps sending them an email saying, here are the facts of the situation, and here's my specific question I'd like to talk about with you, so that you can have a 5-minute phone conversation instead of a 40-minute phone conversation. And that saves you a lot of money, but you're still getting that expert advice to help you ensure that you're addressing the right questions.
And this is the type of information that I think is profoundly useful through what SCORE does. All mentors through SCORE answer these questions and bring up topics that maybe you never thought of and maybe you didn't think you had to think of. But it just makes you an invaluable resource to especially new business owners and young business owners. So thank you so much for what you do.
Our pleasure. The most common question I think I see is, where do I find funding? And in our first conversation, that almost always turns into, do you really understand your value proposition? Because to find funding, you typically need some sort of a business plan and a cash flow projection, and you're not really in a position to develop those until you've thought about your market and why they're going to buy your product and how big a share of that market you expect to get versus the competition. And that's a lot of complicated thinking that goes into that. Understanding that is important, and that's why I started this presentation by focusing on the value proposition.
Mhm. And that's something that one of our viewers brought up. He owns a business, and it's in a very saturated industry here in the region. Can you speak a little bit about entering a saturated industry? Because when I drive down the street, I see about 5 coffee shops, multiples of everything. And I just, that makes me think, these people still step into business and are able to make it in the market.
Yeah. I called it a value proposition. A more common name for it is a unique value proposition. What makes your business unique relative to the others that are out there? So, if you just want to take your example, Rachel, if you just want to open a coffee shop, that's nice, but look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself as truthfully as you can, why would
Mhm.
people visit my shop instead of the other? And sometimes the answer can be really simple, like because my location is so much more convenient for them. And you could succeed based purely on convenience, even though maybe your product wasn't as good as the one down the street, but you're more convenient. That might be enough to make your business successful. On the other hand, it might not. And you might have to have a combination of factors, such as convenience, perhaps, and price, maybe,
Mhm.
perhaps, and quality, maybe, perhaps, and service. Uh, and in many businesses, the key is to understand why your customer values what you're offering. And some people value it for the taste, some people value it because it's quick. And how can you serve those differing segments of your market who visit you for totally different reasons?
Mhm.
Well, understanding why they visit your competition and then they might visit you instead is what potentially gives you an opening to compete against the existing entrenched competition. Sometimes you can do it quite successfully, and sometimes they have huge barriers to entry. They're going to be very difficult to overcome. That's for you to decide as the owner of the business, but don't go into it with blinders on thinking, I'm great because I'm a nice guy. Um, that isn't necessarily going to be enough to earn their business.
And I hear friends that I have in the region, when they've started their businesses, I know how informed they are. I know how much expertise they have, yet they still face challenges.
Mm.
Maybe because they're not going into it intentionally, as you've just described. Looking at their competition and evaluating the value of their business. So um, that everything I've absorbed everything that you said today. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. We're happy to help, and we're all volunteers, and we do it because it's fun. So we just hope that you all who are running your own businesses have as much fun running your businesses as we do volunteering.
Well, thank you again, Whit, for such an informative presentation today. And of course, thank you to my fellow chamber staff for helping to produce yet another successful virtual event. Thank you for everyone who attended today and throughout the season. If you're interested in continuing the conversation with Whit and learning more about SCORE, be sure to check your email for a follow-up message with links to additional resources. That email will include contact information for Whit and his slide deck from today. Another shout out, of course, to Eaton Peabody, our series sponsor, for supporting us throughout this season. The Eaton Peabody Growth Basics for Business series is typically held on the third Tuesday of each month. Today, however, was our final presentation of this season, but we do look forward to seeing you again in September for the next season of Growth Basics for Business. If you're interested in presenting next season or know of a business expert who may be interested, please visit our website, portlandregion.com, to submit an event proposal. Any questions, our team's direct contact information can be found there as well. So with that, thank you again for attending today's event, and have a wonderful rest of your day.